I want to start with a statistical finding I sat with for a long time before I understood what it was telling me. The Barna Group has been studying religious disaffiliation in America for decades. Their research on why adults leave organized religion is careful, methodical, and based on large samples across denominations and regions. They ask the people who have left why they left. And the answer consistently, across years of data, is not what most people expect. It is not primarily intellectual doubt, not primarily scandal, though scandal is real, not primarily the demands of secular culture, though those are relentless. The primary reason adults leave organized religion, according to the research, is this: I felt like I could never be good enough for my parents' God. Not their own God, their parents' God. Sit with that for a moment, and then notice something the research also shows, which Pew Research Center data on Catholic disaffiliation confirms. Catholic men leave the church at rates 2 to 3 times higher than Catholic women. The gender asymmetry is striking. And one variable that appears consistently in the qualitative data is maternal religious pressure, experienced as condemnation during adolescence. I want to put those two findings together. The sons who leave most completely are often not from secular homes. They are from the most devout ones. That is the paradox I want to examine tonight, not to condemn anyone, not to assign blame, but because Padre Pio, who sat behind that confessional grate at San Giovanni Rotondo for 50 years and saw through the surface of every soul who came to him, saw this pattern with a precision most of us have never been given the tools to understand. And what he saw, and what he refused to absolve, is the answer to why those sons are gone. My name is Raymond. I spent 35 years teaching Catholic theology at a high school in Covington, Kentucky. I retired believing I understood the faith I had been teaching. Then I read the actual letters, not the curated selections in devotional books, the Epistolario, all 4 volumes. And then I attended Father Chad Ripperger's conference on spiritual warfare and the family in 2018. What I found in those 2 sources changed the way I understand something I had been watching for decades, without being able to name it. The Barna finding I cited earlier had puzzled me for years as a teacher. I watched it happen in classroom after classroom. The boy who stops attending Mass at 18, the young man who uses words like oppressive and toxic when he talks about his upbringing, even though the family never missed Mass, even though the rosary was said every night, even though his mother was by any external measure a faithful and devout Catholic woman who genuinely loved God. I had no framework for why that happened. The Epistolario and Ripperger gave me the framework, and what I found in it was not what the textbooks covered. Stay with me, because this matters more than you may realize. Let me begin where the evidence begins, with what Padre Pio actually saw when devout mothers came to his confessional. The documented confessional accounts of Padre Pio come primarily from 3 sources I trust. Franz Alessio Parenti's Send Me Your Guardian Angel, C. Bernard Ruffin's Padre Pio, The True Story, the most rigorously sourced biography in English, and Ferno Alberto D'Appolito's Padre Pio of Pietrelcina. Each draws on testimony from people who witnessed or experienced what happened in and around that confessional at San Giovanni Rotondo. Multiple devout women came to Padre Pio with a specific grief. Their sons had left the church. These were not negligent mothers. These were not women who had failed to pray or to bring their children to Mass or to pass on the faith. In case after case, the women who came to Padre Pio with this particular wound were among the most externally devoted Catholics in their communities, daily communicants, leaders of parish organizations, women who had said the family rosary every night when the children were small, and Padre Pio, who listened to each confession with the precision of a physician who knew that the symptom is almost never the wound, did something that surprised them. He did not move immediately to comfort. He asked a question. In the accounts preserved in D'Appolito's biography, multiple women who came to Padre Pio about estranged sons received the same question, asked in different words each time, but always carrying the same weight. Does he know that you are proud of him? Not, does he know you love him? Not, does he know you pray for him? Does he know that when you think about him, not about his choices, not about his decisions, but about him, your first emotion is gratitude that he exists? The answer in case after case, was silence, or something like what one woman reportedly said, "He knows I love him." And Padre Pio, with the gentleness that characterized his most difficult pastoral moments, would say, "That is not what I asked." He wanted to know about pride, not the pride of accomplishment, not pride in the son's achievements or future prospects. The simple, unconditional, uncomplicated pride of a mother who looks at her son and her first instinct is warmth. Warmth that has nothing to do with what he has done or left undone. And what the answer revealed, the silence, the redirection to love rather than pride, was that the son did not know this. What the son knew was the verdict. He knew when his mother was disappointed. He knew the expression on her face when he missed Mass, when he made a choice that fell short of the standard. He knew the quality of her silence when he did not measure up. And in one recorded account, preserved in the Ruffin biography, Padre Pio articulated what he saw with an exactness I want you to hear slowly. He said something to the effect of, "You pray, but when your son walks in the room he feels judged, not loved. That is not God's love passing through you. That is your pride wearing God's garment. Your pride wearing God's garment." I have returned to that sentence more times than I can count, because it names with surgical precision the mechanism that most of us have been watching in Catholic families for decades without knowing what we were seeing. Now let me explain why this is not simply a psychological problem, why it is specifically a theological one, why Ripperger identifies it as one of the most dangerous legal rights in the category of false piety. Thomas Aquinas, in the Summa Theologica, question 162, defines pride as the inordinate love of one's own excellence. It is the first sin, the original rebellion, and it is uniquely capable of infecting religious practice so completely that Mass attendance, rosary, sodality work, and public devotion become vehicles for self-exaltation rather than self-donation. The devout Catholic woman is not immune. She is, by the nature of her public religious identity, particularly exposed, because the more genuine her faith becomes, and it may be genuinely deep, the more pride has available to it a camouflage that is indistinguishable from the inside, from the virtue itself. Ripperger calls this the adhesion pattern. Pride adheres to the last virtue mastered, and the more completely the virtue is integrated into a person's identity, the more invisible the pride that has attached to it becomes. The woman who has genuinely achieved real devotion is particularly vulnerable to pride attaching itself to that achievement invisibly. The more real the faith, the more subtle the camouflage. Padre Pio articulated this same dynamic in a letter to his spiritual director, Padre Agostino Daniele, around 1912 in Volume 1 of the Epistolario. He wrote, "The soul that thinks itself advanced is precisely the one most in danger. Pride does not announce itself. It arrives wearing the clothes of the last virtue you mastered, the clothes of the last virtue you mastered." For a woman of genuine piety, a woman who has genuinely grown in faith, who has genuinely persevered, who has genuinely maintained a prayer life that others in the parish admire and depend on, that last virtue is her devotion itself. And what Ripperger calls the inverted grace channel begins at exactly that point. When a mother's religious identity becomes fused with personal pride, when her devotion is no longer primarily about her dependence on God, but about her own excellence as a faithful Catholic woman, something shifts in the direction of grace. The grace that was meant to flow outward, through her, to the people she is called to cover, turns inward. It feeds the pride instead. And her children, who are meant to receive that grace through the channel of her motherhood, receive instead something colder, something that evaluates, something that requires them to reflect well on her in order to receive her warmth. The channel has not been closed, it has been inverted. Ripperger notes what he calls the specific inversion. The most committed religious households can paradoxically produce the most spiritually estranged sons, not despite the mother's devotion, but because of the pride that secretly animated it. And the son who grew up being warmed only when he performed well, who experienced the mother's love as conditional on the religious output, is not receiving the love of God through her. He is receiving the love of a mother for her own spiritual excellence, passed through the channels of genuine devotion, and one day, exhausted by the cost of a love that has conditions he can never fully meet, he stops going to Mass. And his mother weeps and prays and wonders what she did wrong. She is right to wonder, but she is not looking in the right place. I want to pause here, because before I go further into the mechanism, I need to tell you about something I put together after spending weeks going through Padre Pio's documented pastoral encounters with this specific pattern. The more I research the anatomy of how hidden pride in piety becomes the exact wound that estranges a son from the church, the more I realized that what the church offers in response goes deeper than most Catholics have ever been to in a confession. I wrote it down, step by step. The kind of confession Padre Pio was actually asking for, not the list of external sins, but the structures underneath, the pride that has been wearing a costume for so long that the person carrying it has lost the ability to see it as pride. That guide is called The Perfect Confession, and I left it in the description, because what I am about to explain is exactly what that guide was written for. But stay with me. The evidence of how this wound forms in a son is something every Catholic mother needs to hear. Let me take you inside the son's interior experience over the course of a childhood. Not what the mother intended, what he received. The son is 7 years old. He comes home with a report card, 1A, 3 Bs. His mother looks at the card. She says the right things, but the son can read something underneath the right things, a small calibration, a mental note being made. He is 9. He forgets his morning prayers before school. His mother does not yell. She says something quiet and careful, something that communicates very precisely that the forgetting has been noted. He is 12. He makes friends with a boy from a non-Catholic family. His mother says nothing direct, but she asks certain questions about this boy. There is an expression she wears when that boy's name comes up. The expression is not unkind, it is evaluating. He is 16. He misses Mass once because of a basketball game. His mother attends Mass without him, and when she returns, her manner toward him carries something he cannot name, but has been feeling his whole life. A verdict, not cruelty, not hatred, not particular malice in this specific instance. Just the perpetual, quiet, careful maintenance of an account, the ongoing registry of where he stands in relation to the standard that he has never been told explicitly, but that he knows with the precision of someone who has been living under it since he could speak. And the standard he understands without being able to say it is not a standard of love. It is a standard of performance. Religious performance, yes, but performance. And what Ripperger's framework identifies as the spiritual allergy forms here over years, one small interaction at a time. The son is not developing an allergy to God. He is developing an allergy to a specific, carefully constructed, entirely sincere counterfeit of God. A God who watches with measuring eyes. A God whose love is conditioned on the output. A God who is, and this is the enemy's most efficient instrument because the son cannot see through it, indistinguishable from his mother's assessment of him. When the son thinks of the church, he does not primarily experience the love of the father. He experiences the quality of attention he grew up under, evaluating, recording, waiting for the performance to justify the warmth. This is why he leaves, not because he has rejected Christ, because the Christ he was raised under is not Christ. He is leaving a counterfeit. And because the counterfeit was built from real faith, from genuine Mass attendance, real rosaries, a mother who genuinely believed she loved God, the son cannot see through it to the real thing. He only knows that when he is near it, he cannot breathe. Ripperger makes this explicit. The son who grows up inside the inverted grace channel develops what might be called a standing interior association. Proximity to church equals proximity to condemnation. The enemy actively reinforces this association because it is extraordinarily difficult to cure. The son cannot distinguish between the authentic Christ and the version of Christ that the pride created. The mother's hidden pride gave the enemy a specific instrument, and that instrument continues working long after the mother herself has begun to change. The son is in the far country by then. He does not come back easily, because what would he come back to? The thing he is allergic to is still, from everything he can tell, the church. He cannot see that what he is actually allergic to is a construction the enemy built inside his formation using his mother's best materials, and that only the mother herself, in specific sacramental surrender of the pride that powered it, can begin to dismantle. Let me tell you about Barbara Connolly, autumn of 2004, Covington Parish. A parents' evening I was helping to organize, the ordinary kind that happens every semester. Barbara was not one of my students' parents exactly. She moved in the orbit of the parish. Her son Thomas had been in my theology class 2 years before, a quiet, precise boy. Not difficult, not rebellious. Good at theology, actually, in the way a boy is good at a subject when he has grown up breathing it. Thomas was 24 when Barbara came to find me that evening. She had heard that I had said something in a recent class about adult children and faith, and Thomas had apparently repeated it at dinner. She asked if she could speak with me for a moment. I found her in the hallway outside the gymnasium. She said, "Mr. Henderson, I don't understand it. We went to Mass every Sunday. I led the women's sodality for 11 years. I said the family rosary every night when the children were small. I did everything right. And Thomas just looks at me and says he's done. Like everything I built means nothing." I let her finish. Then I asked her one question. "Can I ask you something, Barbara? Does Thomas know that you're proud of him?" She stopped. "Of course She looked at me. "He knows I love him. That's not what I asked. Does he know you're proud of him? Does he know that when you think about him, not about his choices, not about his decisions, but about him, your first emotion is gratitude? Or does he only know when you're disappointed?" The hallway was noisy around us, parents moving in groups toward the gymnasium. Barbara stood very still. She did not speak for a moment that was long enough to be remarkable. "He knows when I'm disappointed." She said it quietly, the way a person says something that surprised them by being true. "Then Thomas doesn't know his mother's faith," I said. "He only knows her verdict. And if you were Thomas, if every time you encountered your mother's religion, what you felt was a verdict on yourself, what would you do?" She looked toward the gymnasium doors. She said, very quietly, "I would leave." I gave her one question to take home. Not advice, not a prescription. One question. If your faith were entirely private, if no one in your family ever saw you pray or go to Mass or lead the sodality, would it change anything about how you practice it? Barbara did not answer that in the hallway. She thanked me and went in to find her seat. 3 months later, she stopped me in the church parking lot after Sunday Mass. She had written Thomas a letter. She told him that she had been wrong, that she had worn her faith like a crown and made him feel like a commoner in his own home, that she had confused her love for God with her need to be seen as a good Catholic mother, that she was sorry. Not in general terms, specifically. She named what she had done. Thomas called back. He was not ready to come back to Mass. She was clear about that. She did not tell me he had returned to the sacraments or that the breach was fully healed. This was not the ending of a tidy story. But he called. And for the first time in 4 years, the conversation did not become a verdict. She said he heard something different in me. We were standing in the November cold of the church parking lot, and she was not crying. She was very still, the way a woman is still when she has understood something that shifts the shape of a long time. "I don't know how," she said, but he heard it. I want to stay with what Barbara's letter actually accomplished, not as a therapeutic gesture, as a spiritual act. Because the change Thomas perceived, the thing he heard in her voice that was different, was not the result of a conversation about emotional patterns. It was the result of something Padre Pio had been asking for behind that confessional grate in various forms for 50 years. The naming of the specific thing, not, "I have been too critical," not, "I have had high expectations." The actual name, "I have made my devotion to God into a verdict on you. I have loved you while secretly requiring that your choices reflect well on me. I have worn God's name as a crown, and you felt it." That is an act of naming that carries spiritual consequence. In Ripperger's framework, the pride that animated the inverted grace channel established a specific legal right. Not through a single deliberate sin, but through the accumulated weight of a life lived, in part, as spiritual performance for an invisible audience. An audience that included her children. An audience Thomas grew up watching his mother play to, however unconsciously. When Barbara named the pride specifically, not the symptoms but the thing underneath, She was doing what Ripperger identifies as the precondition for the reversal of a legal right. You cannot surrender what you have not named, and you cannot name what you have spent years presenting to yourself as virtue. The question I gave Barbara in that hallway, would you practice differently if no one ever saw, was the question that cracked the frame. Because the honest answer produced a recognition. There was a version of the prayer life, the sodality leadership, the public rosary that was not purely for God. Some of it had been for the registry, for the invisible account of what kind of Catholic woman she was. And some of what Thomas received all those years, some of what he experienced as verdict, was not God's standard communicated through a mother. It was the mother's standard, dressed in God's garment. When Barbara named that in the letter and surrendered it in a confession that came shortly after, the instrument changed. The construction the enemy had been operating through for 24 years lost something it needed. And Thomas, who was not told what had happened, who did not know what had been surrendered, heard something different in his mother's voice. He could not have explained what was different. He only knew that for the first time, the verdict was not in the air between them. I want to tell you something I believe Padre Pio understood about these sons that their mothers did not. He understood that they were not, in most cases, genuinely estranged from God. They were estranged from a construction. In Dapolito's accounts, there is a question Padre Pio asked one of these mothers that has stayed with me. After she described her estranged son, the years away, the distance, the wall he had built, Padre Pio asked her something she had not expected. Does he know that God is pleased with him? Not. Does he know what he needs to change? Not. Does he know what the church requires of him? Does he know that God looks at him right now exactly as he is and is pleased with him? The woman was silent. Padre Pio waited. Then he said something to the effect of, if he does not know this, he has not yet met the real God. He has not yet met the real God. Not because God is absent from the church, but because the way the church was presented to that son, through the lens of a mother whose devotion was fused with pride, had hidden the real God behind the construction. The God who looks at a son who has walked away from Mass, who has not said the rosary in years, who is somewhere far from everything his mother built, and says, there he is, my son. That God, not the God of the account, not the God of the standard, not the God whose love must be earned before it is available, the one who welcomes before the speech has been delivered. Your son is looking for that God. He may not be looking in a church. He may not be using theological language. He may say he has left the faith entirely, that organized religion is something he is finished with. He is looking for the God his mother's construction obscured from him. And the documented testimonies from the Padre Pio Devotions Archive record something that I want you to hear carefully. Sons returned to the church specifically after their mothers underwent this particular conversion. Not a conversion from dramatic sin, a conversion of the subtle self-righteousness that had infected their devotion. In case after case, the sons sensed the change before being told anything had changed. The mother did not announce what she had confessed. The son did not know what had shifted. He only knew that something was different in the air, that the thing he had been allergic to was no longer operating with the same force, that he could, for the first time, feel a difference between the counterfeit and something else. And the something else was enough to start a conversation, enough to make a phone call, enough to let the door open a little. Your son is not unreachable. Padre Pio believed this. He spent 50 years believing it from behind that grate. Now I want to give you the specific diagnostic, not a general examination of conscience, because the pride I'm describing does not respond to a general self-examination. By definition, it has been invisible to the person carrying it. It presents not as arrogance but as faithfulness, not as selfishness but as appropriate standards, not as performance but as caring. You will not find it by asking, am I proud? You will find it by answering 3 specific questions honestly enough to write the answers down. The first question, when your son walks away from the church, what is your first emotion? Not your second emotion, not your considered theological response. Your first, is it grief for him or is it shame for you? Grief for him means, I am devastated by what he is losing. I am afraid for his soul. I ache for the truth and beauty he is turning away from, and I ache for it because I want it for him. Shame for you means something different. A flash of response to the social position. The question of what this says about who you are. The image of yourself as a woman who raised her children in the faith, and what his departure does to that image. You may feel both. Most mothers do. But which one comes first, before you have had time to curate the response, is diagnostic. The second question: if you imagine your son telling someone he is not religious, a friend, a colleague, someone whose opinion has no bearing on your life, what do you imagine that person thinking? If you are imagining what they think of your son, you are in grief. If you are imagining even briefly what they think of you, what his choice communicates about who you are as a mother and as a Catholic woman, you are in the territory of pride. The third question, and this is the one that Padre Pio's question to Barbara was really pointing toward: would you still pray as fervently for your son if no one ever knew you were doing it? If the prayer is identical, whether witnessed or unwitnessed, if the rosary you say for him in the dark of the early morning is the same prayer you would say if it were guaranteed no one would ever know you had prayed it, then the prayer is rooted in love. If the answer to that question produces a hesitation, if you notice that the public dimension of your devotion functions differently from the private, that something about being known as a praying mother for an estranged son has a weight that purely private prayer does not, then there is something in the prayer that is for you as well as for him. Write the answers down before you edit them. The interior answer can be revised, softened, curated before you have registered what you actually thought. The written answer sits on the page and asks to be acknowledged. What is written down can be brought to what closes it. I want to say something directly to every mother listening who has recognized herself in any part of what I have described. You are not the villain of this story. A mother who prays every day, who went to Mass faithfully, who carried the faith in her household through years of effort and love and perseverance, that woman is not the enemy. She is not fundamentally different from any other person who has tried to live well and found that the enemy has inserted himself into the best parts of her effort. This is precisely what Ripperger means when he identifies pride as the most dangerous legal right. It operates through the vehicle of genuine virtue. The more real the virtue, the better the camouflage. The more thoroughly the faith is integrated into a woman's identity, the more invisibly the pride can attach itself to it. Barbara was not a bad mother. She was a faithful woman, whose faithfulness had accumulated invisibly, a layer of pride she had never been asked to examine. She carried it for years, not because she was blind to her own faults, but because no one had given her the question that would reveal it. Padre Pio gave women that question from behind his confessional grate for 50 years. The question is not, were you a good mother? The question is, what was driving the devotion? And if part of the answer is the pride of being seen as a faithful Catholic woman, if the Mass and the sodality and the family rosary carried within them, alongside genuine love, a performance for an invisible audience that included your children, your parish, your sense of your own excellence as a believer, then that part is what gave the enemy his specific instrument. That part is what the confession needs to name, not the symptoms, the thing underneath. Because what your son needed, what every son in this situation needs, is not a better version of the performance. He needs to meet, through his mother, a God whose love has no performance requirement, a God who was pleased with him before he did anything to deserve it. And the only way that God becomes visible to him through her is if she has first gone to the place where the performance is surrendered, where the pride is named, where the crown is laid down. When the construction collapses, the real God has room to move. He has been wanting to move for a long time. Here is what I want you to do. 3 steps. I'm calling this the Hidden Pride Reversal Protocol. The first step is tonight. 15 minutes alone, in writing. Paper, not a screen. Sit down, alone. Write at the top of the page, what I have confused with faithfulness. Then answer the 3 diagnostic questions as honestly as you can in writing. First emotion, what you imagine others thinking. The witnessed versus unwitnessed prayer. And then answer one more question. This is the question Barbara was sitting with before she was able to write the letter. If my son walked through the door tonight and told me he was never coming back to the church, If I knew with certainty this was his final decision, could I still love him completely, without the verdict? Could I be in his presence, a mother whose first and only emotion is love, without the overlay of what his choice means for me? Write what comes up before you edit it. That answer is the place the confession begins. The second step is tonight, when the house is quiet, kneeling if you are able. Speak this prayer aloud, not in your head. Aloud because what has accumulated in the unseen economy needs to be addressed by something more than an interior thought. Say this: Lord, show me what my faith looks like from my son's eyes, not what I intended, what he received. If I have worn your name as a crown and made him feel like a commoner in your kingdom, if my love for you became, without my knowing it, a verdict on him, I ask for the grace to see it. I do not ask to be absolved tonight. I ask to be shown. Your servant Padre Pio refused to give absolution to those who were not yet ready to see the wound beneath the sin. Tonight, I am asking to see mine. Say that aloud. Stay with it afterward. Let whatever comes up come up. The third step is within 7 days confession, and here the precision matters more than almost anything else I am going to tell you. Padre Pio refused to absolve the woman who came with a careful summary. He wanted the specific thing, the actual name, not the category, the particular. Do not go to the priest and say, I have been too hard on my son. I have had excessive religious expectations. Go and say this: I have worn my faith as a mark of superiority in my son's presence. I have allowed my devotion to God to carry within it an unspoken verdict on his failures. I have made the church feel to him like my achievement rather than his father's house. I confess this as pride, not as impatience or disappointment, but as the pride underneath. The pride that dressed itself in devotion for years and that I have never before brought to this sacrament by its real name. That specificity is not to make the confession harder. It is to make it real. Because the enemy's grip on a legal right loosens in exact proportion to how precisely the right is named and surrendered. A vague confession produces a partial absolution of the surface. A specific confession in which the thing is named as it actually is brings the sacramental grace of absolution directly against the structure the pride has built. That structure is where the instrument lives, the instrument the enemy has been using to make your son associate God with condemnation. When the instrument is removed, specifically, sacramentally, in the confessional, where it can be properly named and surrendered, what was blocking the real God from moving in that relationship loses its hold. Your son will not necessarily come back to Mass the following Sunday. He may not come back for years, but something will change. The air in the relationship will be different. He will sense it before you can explain it. He heard something different in me. That is what Barbara said. Standing in the November cold, trying to describe something she could not fully explain. He will not know what it is. He will only know that the verdict is no longer in the air, and that for the first time in a long time the door is open. I spent weeks compiling the full structure of this confession, what Padre Pio was actually asking for, the specific protocol for naming pride in piety as a sacramental matter rather than a personal growth question, the prayers, the preparation, the precise language. I put it in a guide called The Perfect Confession, and it is in the description. If you don't know how to bring this deep into the confessional, if you have never made a confession that goes beneath the list of external sins, into the structures underneath, that guide walks you through it, step by step, the way Padre Pio would have asked you to. It is the most important thing in the description. Don't leave without it. Let me close with something Padre Pio wrote that I keep coming back to. In his letters to Raffaellina Serace, around 1914 and 1915, Volume 2 of the Epistolario, he wrote, "There is a pride that dresses itself in devotion. It is more destructive than open vice because it cannot recognize itself. It wears the face of virtue and calls itself faithfulness." He had been watching it for years by the time he wrote that. In the confessional, behind the grate, in the parade of devout women who came to him with every species of spiritual wound. He had been watching the pride that could not see itself, the pride that went to daily Mass, the pride that led the sodality, the pride that said the family rosary every night when the children were small, and he had been watching what it did to the sons. He knew those sons were not lost. He knew they were not faithless. He knew they were estranged from a counterfeit. And when the counterfeit was surrendered, when the pride was named and the instrument removed, the real God had room to move. He watched this happen. In the testimonies that have been preserved across decades, mothers who came back after a confession of a different kind, sons who changed without knowing why, the thing in the air between them that was different. Your son is not unreachable. He is not estranged from God. He is estranged from a version of God that the enemy built inside his formation, using the best materials you had. That version is dismantled in the confessional, not by you confronting him, not by you explaining what changed, not by another conversation about faith, about Mass, about the things he has walked away from, by you going to the priest and naming the pride for exactly what it is, and by the absolution landing where absolution lands, on the specific thing named in the specific wound, in the specific structure the pride has occupied. Take the mirror examination tonight. Say the prayer on your knees. Go to confession this week and name the thing by its real name, not for your sake only, for the son who has never met the God you actually know, the God whose first word is not verdict, the God whose first word is come, the God who was looking at your son right now exactly as he is, with pleasure, before your son ever did anything to deserve it. Your son is still a long way off, but the road is still open, and the God who made him is watching it. He has been watching it the whole time your son has been gone. He is patient. He is not finished. Take this with you tonight. God bless you, and stay vigilant.